Tony, he's an educator, author, and activist working to advance gender and racial justice and create a more equitable society. He's internationally recognized for his efforts to prevent violence against women while promoting a healthy and respectful manhood. He is a leading voice on issues of manhood, male socialization, and preventing violence against all women and girls. His 2010 TED Talk has been named by GQ magazine as one of the top 10 TED Talks that every man should see. He's also sought out for his in-depth understanding of the collective socialization of men, healthy manhood, healthy masculinity, the intersections of oppression, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and promoting gender and racial equity. He also serves as an advisor to the National Football League, providing policy consultation, working extensively with player engagement, and facilitating violence prevention and healthy manhood training. He's also provided trainings to the National Basketball Association, National Hockey League, Major League Soccer, and Major League Baseball. He's an international lecturer for the United States State Department, having extensive global experience, including Brazil, India, Africa, and has been a guest presenter to the United Nations Commissions on the Status of Women. He's also worked with the United States military at West Point Academy and the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. He's the author of Breaking Out of the Man Box and visionary for NFL dads dedicated to daughters. And he also has another book coming out very, very soon. So please give a warm welcome and welcome me, Mr. Tony Porter, CEO of A Call to Men.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good to be here with y'all. I was very impressed listening to the task force. That's like a serious coordinated community response, the way it's made up. I really, really encourage you to consider joining any of those committees to your liking. Work is important, and we can't accomplish it without you. So please, I feel like I think I'm echoing. Am I echoing a little bit? Can we turn it down just a little bit, please? Just a little. All right, that's good? Okay, much better. All right. Demand. Well, I see they moved the slides already. Okay, let me just say this. There are a lot of folks here that you're going to be hearing over the next 2 days with a tremendous amount of information, more information than I have. But what I am really good at is setting the stage. And that's my job, is to set the stage for the rest of our time together over the next couple of days. And you'll have folks that's going to really dive into some areas of expertise. I was listening to John, and I'm really invested in that conversation around pornography, right, and what that means. I'll touch on it, but he has more information than I do. So my job is to kind of set the stage for how we go forward. But what I do hope is that my time spent with you will definitely influence the rest of the time that we have together. Let me see, is the clicker working? All right. So we've been talking about demand, and as I've done research, and I heard Sister talking about data, I've been finding data kind of all over the place, right? Kind of all over the place. Like this, I just put multi-billion-dollar industry up there because I've seen data from $6 to $30 billion, this industry, right? But what I'm most captivated about, and when you talk about prevention, right? When you talk about prevention and you talk about demand, and while we know that most of the victims are women, there are a percentage of men there as well, or boys as well, what we also know, most of the buyers are men, right? So I'm working off of that. So if anybody here wants to say, well, you know, some of the buyers are women, or, well, some of the victims are men, we know that. But I'm working off of the majority, and I'm going to be speaking to it from that perspective, right? But 80% of us as men, I'm going to be talking to we as men, the men in this room, in some respect for our time together, are going to represent men in society. I'm going to make the assumption that the men in this room never purchase sex, right? I'm making that assumption, right? We're that 80% because from a prevention perspective, the work is really ours in many respects. How we collectively identify what it means to be a man is a root cause of demand. How we collectively define what it means to be a man is at the root of demand. And that's my job, to help translate that. And we know that 20% of men have purchased sex at some point in time during their lifetime, and there's 6% of men who purchase it on an annual basis. There's a lot of men, and as you can see there, it's still a tremendous amount of what I would call violence. I also believe we have to expand our definition and the use of the word violence. I just want to throw this up before we get started. While other folks are going to have more data, they're going to get much more granular, it was important for me to mention this, right? And that the average age of a person that's sex trafficked is 14 and happens to be a girl, right? And I've heard younger, 12 years old, right? Even a little older. Well, that's why 14 is considered the average, which means happens even younger. I had the experience of visiting a village in India. I'm gonna mess it up, but it's called Singachi, something along those lines. I know I messed it up. 7,000 girls trafficked in this village alone. Men come from far and wide to visit this village. When you talk about, like, anybody in this room do sexual assault work? Sexual assault advocates? Right. And I thank you for your work. There is so rampant and so intense that you can't afford, you sexual assault advocates, if you were in India, you can't afford to wait for the victims, those that are being sold, to come to you. They actually have sexual assault satellites inside of the brothels. So you're working right inside of the brothels. It's that intense, right? For them, it's like, you know, meeting culture, where is that, right? You got to be right there, right? You got to be right in the mix. I'm not saying we got to go that far here, but I am saying we got a lot of work in front of us. And continuing to respond to the violence is necessary, and we need to do that, and we are, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is how do we prevent it? And that's what I want to spend some time talking with you about today. Now, to do that, I want to, this collective socialization of manhood that you heard me mention, that demands, the issue of demand is at the root of collective socialization of manhood. I want to spend a little time talking about how we're collectively taught to define what it means to be a man. I want to break some of that down, because that's the issue that needs to be addressed, and far too often, we're not talking about that, right? We're not talking about the socialization of manhood, at a call to men, we call it the man box, and its contribution to demand. So I'm gonna show you a little short video here. It's a boy here, he's about 3 years old, he's getting vaccination shots, he's at the doctor's office. You see that hand on his shoulder? That's the practitioner about to give him an injection. I wanna watch the video, and I'm gonna take just a couple of minutes engaging with you around the video. Now, I wanna say this also. The large majority of the buyers are men. In many respects, those who have to really step up in this space is men. By and large, not 100%, but by and large, if women could end the violence on their own, they would have already. For me, that's a given. We can't count on the men who are perpetrating the violence. But who's left from this? If it was an equation, who's left from this equation is us. It's no coincidence that looks like at least 3/4 of the room here are women. Identify, I'm making an assumption, but I'm working with that assumption. Where would we be in this effort? It's a fair question. Where would we be in this effort if 3/4 of the room right now were men? It's a fair question for us to grapple with. So while asking that question and throwing that out, I want to say to the women in the room, I may very well in my engagement ask a few men, I may very well in my engagement ask men a few more questions than I may ask you. Part of the work also is for we as men to develop a voice to speak to these issues. We're the first generation of men having a responsibility to step up in this space, all right? I will never silence the voice of women, but I need to talk to the men, all right? And I need y'all to be good with that, all right? All right, so let's watch this video, and then on the other side, we'll have a few questions for you. And again, it's about 3 years old. I didn't say it all. That's the practitioner about to give him the injection, and this is the important part. He's there with his dad, okay?
Yes.
Well, give me your hand. Hold your hand, okay?
Okay.
You got it? Okay, you looking scared.
I'm getting scared.
Yeah, I know.
Scared.
You're a big
okay,
boy, right?
You ready?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna count to 3. I say 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, okay? Now look at Dad. Okay.
Look at me.
Ready?
Say cheese.
3,
Big boy.
2, 3.
Big boy. Be a man.
Ah.
Oh, big boy, don't cry. You got it. Don't
Last
cry.
one, okay?
Don't cry.
1, 2,
Me and Mary,
3.
you got it. Oh, big boy.
You're done.
High five.
You
High
are
five.
done. You did awesome.
Say you a man. I'm a man. Say you can't say it. I'm sorry, so I'm gonna laugh at you. It's okay. It's
High
okay.
five, high five. Big high five.
It's
Good
okay.
job.
Okay.
You wanna come down? Wanna come down? 1, 2, 3.
See? What
You
you
did so good.
What you gotta say? Tell I'm a man. You can't
Say it loud. Say it loud.
Tell I'm a man. High five.
You did awesome.
Turn the camera on so you can cry, okay?
Okay. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to take about a dozen or so responses, but I'm just going to ask you to be very, very brief. I'm not a good keynote speaker because I don't stay behind the podium. If someone is videotaping an event, I'm always problematic. Sometimes they put blue tape X's on the floor to tell me don't go no further, don't go that far. I'm not good at that. At a call to men, we do public speaking for the sole purpose of community engagement. And so if you give me more than 20 minutes at a keynote, I'm going to talk with the people, because that's just how we do what we do. But then I do have to ask the people or remind the people, I'm the keynote, not you. All right? So I need you to keep the comments very, very brief as we engage. All right, so as it relates to those questions there, what did you like? What didn't you like? What concerned you? What might you do the same? What might you do different? Let's just hear from a couple of people, and again, please be brief. Anybody can start. Yes.
It's good that he was there with his dad, for one, because that's support for kids, but also like him trying to brush off the feeling that you just got multiple stabs.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of sucky because I don't even like getting stabbed.
Yes. Appreciate that. What was shared is that it was good that the dad was there, which is always interesting because we would never say it's good that the mom was there, right? It's like, where the heck else is she going to be? Of course she was there, right? So the fact that we're glad that the dad was there is a conversation within itself, right? The whole idea, I'm also paraphrasing what you shared, this whole idea about him crying, right? Of course it hurts, right? How many folks in here have been in the military? Raise your hand. All right. See, now I'm old school military, right? I'm like Vietnam era military. Now, I don't know how it's changed for you younger folks, but when I was in the military, you had to walk through a line and you get needles on both arms, both sides, and you got to walk through that line, right? You probably get about 10 of them by the time you get to the other side. And for 2 days or so, you can't even do this, right? But when you walk through that line, you know, that whole man box is in play. Whether you're a man or a woman, that man box is in play. And you got to walk through that line almost like, you know, you got to have like your Denzel Washington on, right? You got to go through that line like this while they popping you in both arms, right? And you can't move. But by the end of the day, you can't do this. You know, vaccinations are injections in your muscles, right? They hurt. The point is, they hurt. Like, so while he's telling his son, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, what might he have been telling his daughter? Let's say it was his daughter with him. It's okay, baby. Daddy got you, right? I'm here with you. He'll prep her probably. It's going to hurt. You're probably going to cry, right? And I'm going to be there with you. He'll prep her, right? So when we're thinking about gender roles, right? Thinking about gender roles here and how they play out. Somebody else, yes?
Well, he gave him a high five, you know, he turned the high five. If it was a girl, probably would hug her.
Yep, right? And look, it's nothing that I'm talking about for the most part that I haven't done, right? So I'm not standing here like I just, you know, got it all together, you know, and I'll still mess up. We all do as men. There's no graduation here, right? There's no great I ams here. I'm not an expert in much of anything. I got some information I want to share, but I don't use expert as a tie. I'm not an expert. I'm just a man that's been paying attention, and I got some information to share. Yes?
To her point, the phrase I would continue to do that, what I would do differently would be validating that he did a hard thing, right? It's okay to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. And I think in some way he said, you know, you shouldn't cry by you know, you're a man, you shouldn't. But there was a small piece, like he said, you want me to turn the camera off now so you can cry?
Right.
And I think there's a message in that too.
Very important message. I'm glad you caught it, because usually at the end, there's a lot of energy in the room when he says, I'm a man, which is a conversation in itself as well. The way he said, I'm a man, he had to like bring up this like anger was in play, right? But most people miss that, because the whole idea of crying in public, right? Like around what age is it no longer okay for a boy to cry in public?
1.
Somebody said 1. 10, well, think about 10. 10, he's in the 5th grade, getting ready to go to middle school.
Depends on where he's crying, right? He's crying at school and he's crying at home.
Yeah, public, I said in public. At home is somewhat private, right? But public, crying in the public, right? We say about 5 years old, school bus age, is where we start really locking into boys with the stop crying, or don't cry, right? And then we learn how to pull back what we call the crocodile tears, to the point where we don't shed tears. Yes?
I think this video just gave a pretty good example of how the suppression of authentic emotion, especially for boys, contributes to the development of maladaptive coping skills. Because you can see that anger come out, now he's going to wipe his tears and be angry. Even though there was an invitation to cry afterwards, we had to mask it with anger.
So I'm going to paraphrase what you shared for the room, is that suppression of emotions, right? We have boys lock down their feelings and emotions, and the only emotion we give them permission to express is what? Anger. And we don't even know what anger actually is, because anger, while being an emotion, is a secondary emotion, is a response to one or two emotions. Every time you get angry, you're either scared or your feelings was hurt. But we don't know that as men, because as she was also sharing, we grow up with limited emotional intelligence as men. When you shut down, we shut down our feelings and emotions, while women have permission based on socialization, collective socialization, to express a full range of emotions. Women, in essence, at the end of the day, know much more about who they are emotionally speaking than we as men, right? That's why if your wife says to you right now, she texts you right now and says, when you get home, we need to talk. you'll be sweating the rest of the time we're here. All right, what am I going to have to talk about? I had planned to watch the game. I had planned to do this. I had a little this in the yard I wanted to do. I got to talk, right? Yes.
In the dad's defense, we don't know the environment that he's trying to prepare that young man for.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Section 8 housing and projects. I now live in the country club. I've lived in both worlds. And my son, if he starts crying and we're in the country club social setting, the response is, hey, is he okay? Hey, is there anything we can do to help him? Hey, what's going on with him? Is he all right? Where I grew up at, until I was 18 years old and was able to climb out of that environment, it was, you need to man up. You trying to get beat down? You want to get beat down? You better cry in tears. We don't know what environment that little boy's going back to. And that, again, I think, a call to men is a conversation to have. But I think we have to recognize that some of us in this room maybe haven't lived in the social setting that that young man's going back to.
Look, I grew up in that setting. I raised 6 kids, 4 of them in that setting. Let me say this to what you're saying, your point's well taken, is there are tension points, there are sweet spots, there's negotiations and all that you share, right? But there's still room to teach men who we are emotionally, right? There's still room to teach men what we more openly teach girls, or teach boys what we more openly teach girls. Because now I know many folks would do the same thing with their daughter. You know, stop crying, you know. My daughter was an avid softball player, right? And she was a rough and tough, in the dirt softball player. And I loved every minute of it. I loved every minute of it. But I had to call her off a lot of times because she'd be ready to fight. She called it throwing hands. She'd be ready to fight. She'd be ready to do everything. It was all about winning, right? Now, and we support, I'm not talking about the fighting part. I would just have to yell out her name a lot of times and she just stopped. But the point I'm making is we love that rough and tough stuff with our boys and then we get a little twisted with it with our girls. So there is space for us to teach all genders the same message growing up, right? There's space for that. There's the geographical concerns of how to negotiate communities and workplaces and all of that. There's room for all of that. But at the same time, when we shut down feelings and emotions with boys, it's damaging to them and in many respects to everybody that's vulnerable to them. Your point is well taken. All right, let me move on. Thank y'all for sharing. Did I miss a hand that was up? I don't want to. Yes.
Whenever you say there's characteristics that would benefit both genders, I think at one point in the video, the dad's trying to encourage, he's trying to encourage him to be resilient, to bounce back from it. But instead of, what he should have done is say, you're brave. Because he acknowledges his fear. He's like, you're scared, right? And okay, then he could have said, good, that's a prerequisite for courage.
Right.
And
Appreciate that.
not so.
And you're talking about, many of you spoke about it, the notion of being nurturing, right? When we think about the characteristics of nurturing, is to be loving, is to be kind, is to be gentle, is to be tolerant, is to be patient, right? There's a lot, and we as men don't quite do that as well as women. We'll coach real well, but we don't nurture as well. I'm here to give testimony that our boys need nurturing from us, right? Our boys need nurturing from us. Now, wrapped around this man box is homophobia. We believe it's the glue that keeps the man box together. And I think that's a big challenge for us as men, right, in nurturing and that kind of love that we're talking about with our boys. Like, there are a number of us in this room right now who knows their dad was very loving, but he never said, I love you. I'm not even going to ask you to raise your hand, but there's a number of us. And there's also a number of us in this room can think of or know of, remember like it was yesterday, the one time he did say, I love you, because it was only once. There's a number of us in this room as well. And we all can give testimony to what we missed out on and what was in his rearing that contributed to him not having the ability. So I'm with my brother here about those negotiations. I grew up between Harlem and the Bronx, right? I don't even have to say where that's at, right? I get that. But what, at the same time, did I miss out from my dad, right, who never said he loved me, though I know he did. Friends would tell me different things about him, that he would share accomplishments I've had in my life with his friends, and they would say different things to me at different times, so I know he was talking about me. I only seen my dad cry once, and that was when my brother died tragically when we was kids, right? And he apologized for crying in front of me, by the way. We're still at the cemetery. We're getting ready to drive home. All the women got out of the limousine to go to the bathroom. It was a 2-hour drive home. Him and I stayed in the limousine. He knew he wasn't going to make it back to the city. We're out in Long Island. If you know anything about New York, about a 2-hour drive. He knew he wasn't going to make it back to the city without crying. And he didn't want to cry definitely in front of the women. When they got out the limousine, he bust out crying. But what stayed with me is while he was crying, he was apologizing to me for crying in front of me. What happened to my father that led to him believing that that's the only way to deal with his feelings and emotions, right? So, when you look at this here, I heard Ricky present on this one time, and it really captivated me. I want to ask a few men in the room, which one were you? The boy out front, who's pretty much the leader in charge, holding it down? The boy over here, kind of like saying, well, if his hands are up, my hands are up. Or the boy over here that's pretty much saying, I ain't too sure about this. I want to ask a couple of men in the room, which one were you? Without me pointing to you. Yes, sir.
I was the last one growing up around that age. Once I got about middle school, near some high school, I was trying to be like the one in front.
So you started here,
Started out number 3.
right? By the time you got to middle school and high school, you were here?
Yes.
What changed for you?
Sports, I did a lot, and then I didn't find out who my dad was until I was like 19, 20. So I had all my uncles and them kind of like being in the spot for that. So that's why I was like third first, and then I went first.
And I heard many men share that this is who they were. I heard a woman share once, this was her brother, right? And she loved who he was when he was in that place of uncertainty. And then she said, not saying this is you, but she said when he got here, he was horrible, right? But when he was here, he was gentle, he was kind, he was a lot of things, emotionally speaking. But because, part of what happened to him that got him here is we got a hold of him, right? To teach him what a man is supposed to be. In some cases, his mama, who was a single parent, brought him to us. Maybe on a football field or a basketball court, brought him to us because she knew she needed help. And we turned him into this. I'm not saying that that's all bad at all, because there's a lot in that, right? But it's something about that boy that moves me. Let's hear from one other man. Which one were you? Yes, sir.
This guy in the back left there.
The same?
Stayed there.
Okay. And you said,
I'm not opposing, though.
Well, you said this was you?
Yeah, that's me. It's actually, I did a lot of the guy in the middle just because you kind of have to.
Yeah.
Football and.
Right, right. And when this is actually you, but you find yourself doing this, but you know this is you, we call it being a role self versus your whole self, right? And a big part of our work, when we think about healthy manhood, healthy masculinity, is to help men be their authentic selves. Because based on this collective socialization, what it means to be a man, a lot of us will do this and it's not who we are, right? So I really appreciate when you say, this is who you were and you're still that person. How do you know you're still that person? Describe yourself that says you're still that person.
You know, I don't know if I can describe it, but you said, just the whole male gender role thing. Like, I played football in high school, and I thought the guys that were the biggest macho sort of out front, like, they just always seemed like jerks. I never got comfortable with it. And, the guys that are really, like, I'm all about being a man, and they're always flexing and always challenging, doing all that angry stuff. I just never felt like it was okay. And for the most part, a lot of those guys, I never felt that's probably who they really were, but they were kind of locked in to the role. Like, you're the football captain, you got to be that guy, the homecoming kid, and all that. It's like, even without the education, it just kind of smells wrong to me.
And we're not, I don't want to be offensive to anyone. We're not like taking this guy and just simply saying he's not a good guy. We're not saying that at all, right? We're not saying that at all. It's just how we can, just using it as an example of how we as men begin to find our way as it relates to socialization, all right? I don't know if you can see it in the back of the room, because sometimes the silhouettes don't show up well, but this is a girl, a silhouette of a girl standing like that, and at that end is a silhouette of a boy standing like that. What are we saying with distancing? We are saying that, and a lot of your responses are in here to some degree, what we're saying, far too often, we are taught to define what it means to be a man by distancing ourselves from what we perceive to be the experience of women and girls. Now, perceived is a very important word, but nevertheless, we're taught to define what it means to be a man, right, by distancing ourselves from what we were taught or what we perceive it means to be a woman or a girl. So if women and girls can share their feelings and emotions, men are taught and boys are taught to lock them down, right? This is one of the most important aspects of that. We're taught that men are strong, tough, dominating, courageous, and all those things, right? And we're taught that women are the opposite of that in many respects. Now, we know, I'm comfortable in my assumption that the men in this room know that's a myth, right? But that's what we're taught. Men are tough and strong, women are soft and weak. Now, all of us know it's not true, but I'm going to still say that's what we were taught. One of the reasons why I know as men is what we were taught, because by and large, most men never use the word weak in association with themselves. That's why I know is what we were taught. I want you to think about it for a second, men. So, for example, you ever feel weak? Sir?
Sure.
What's your word for you and weak? Not sure you can come up with one. I can appreciate that. I've heard that many times. You ever feel weak? All right, when you're feeling weak, how do you say I'm feeling weak? Struggling. You ever feel weak? You was like you weren't even sure if you feel weak. Every now and then. How's every now and then? All right, and when you're feeling weak, how do you say I'm feeling weak? I'm out of it. I like that. Cell phones help me out a lot. As I'm getting older, I can sit on the side of the bed and look at some messages that might have came through during the night. What I'm really trying to do is get myself together so I can get up, right? It's why I know it's to be true, because we as men never use the word weak in association with ourselves. And so if I'm off based on that, then you have to help me to understand why that word is not part of our vocabulary. Now, here's where it trips us up also, because we're also taught that asking for help is a sign of what? Weakness, right? So this is what we find. Men don't ask for help, men don't offer help, and far too often we don't accept help. That's a whole nother conversation for what's happening to us. We don't ask for help, we don't offer help, we don't accept help. Defining manhood by distancing ourselves from what we perceive to be the experience of women and girls. We mentioned this. Taught not to be your authentic selves, because it's difficult to be your authentic self when you're trying to define manhood by distancing yourself from the experience of women and girls. Because I'm going to tell you the truth, my truth anyway, a lot of times when we're distancing ourselves from the experience of women and girls, we're distancing ourselves from our own humanity, right? So it's hard to be your authentic self. I really appreciate what the man over here was sharing about, right? You got to be this role self instead of your whole self in many occasions to stay the course. Now, what's also is important, if we're defining manhood by distancing ourselves from what we perceive to be the experience of women and girls, it requires us to have a lack of interest in the experience of women and girls. Now, I'm not saying this is very important to the conversation we're here to talk about as it relates to the man. I'm not saying we don't love and care about the women in our communities, in our circles. I'm not saying that at all, because we do. But overall, you can't have this general interest in the experience of women and girls while defining what it means to be a man by distancing yourself from them. So for example, those of us in the room who attended college, please raise your hand if you took the men in the room who've attended college, please raise your hand if you took a women's studies course while in college. Now, for most of us today, they're available. I don't have any man in the room to raise his hand, and I'm pretty sure the majority of you, if not a good number of you, have gone to college, right? That whole issue of interest. And when I have a man who raises his hand, he'll tell me of a class of 30, it might have been 2 or 3 men in the class, like 10%. And when I would ask him, and what would your friends say when you tell them you're taking the class? How do they make sense of it? And he would say, well, they make sense of it by thinking, I'm there to meet women. That would make sense. 3 men, 27 women. And actually, a little saddened by the fact that they hadn't thought about that, right? Also, there's the realization that it's a women's studies course. It must be easy. That's in there. And if it's none of that, then the only other answer we come up with, well, then he must be gay, right? But what we don't come to terms with or believe or what just doesn't make sense is that he's there simply, solely to learn about the experience of women, right? That doesn't really resonate for men, right? Just to learn about the experience of women. So we have this lack of interest in women. It might look harsh there, but don't take it that way. And again, I know we love and care about the women in our circle, but we have this lack of overall interest in the experience of women and girls. This issue of demand is really important that we as men develop an interest, not only in the experience of women and girls, but what we're raising boys to be men. What does that mean when we're raising boys to be men? At a call to men, our tagline is the next generation of manhood. And yes, there is an urgency of now, but if we were thinking about the next generation of manhood, the next generation to become men, boys to become men, what is required for us to have an impact on demand? and this lack of interest that we're socialized to have in the experience of women and girls is vital, right? Like, I appreciate, we're not hearing crazy numbers, but I still appreciate the men who are in the room. This is to thy own self be true question, but how many of us, I'm not asking anybody to answer this, it's to thy own self be true. How many of us in the room purely related to our jobs, and how many of us in the room because we actually have an interest, right? Now, the retired officer over here who cusses a lot, he's retired. So I'm comfortable that he's here solely because he has an interest, right? But it's a fair question for us to ask ourselves, this whole thing around lack of interest. It is why domestic violence flourishes. It's why sexual violence flourishes. Both are at epidemic proportions, and we throw trafficking right in there with that. Center for Disease Control has said men's violence against women and girls is one of the leading causes of injury to women in our nation. They put it right alongside of cancer and heart disease, the number 1 and 2 cause of death for women in our country. It is at epidemic proportions. If women could end the violence on their own, they would have. We, collectively as men, have to become part of the solution. I'm going to run through a little material here with you because I'm running short on time. This is paramount, though, to this collective socialization of manhood. It's not whether we were taught this. It's to what degree, I'm talking to men, it's to what degree we were taught this and how it's still informing our lives. It's not whether we were taught it, it's to what degree and how it is still, or if it is still informing our lives. Collectively speaking, as men, we've been taught to have less value in women, right? That's why the quickest, the easiest way to tell a boy he's not playing up to par in sports is to tell him he's playing like who? Like a girl. And we don't even say girl anymore because girl happens to be too soft. So we use other language, right? That happens to be more denigrating and dehumanizing, right? Women as the property of men is why domestic violence flourishes in our society. Women as objects, particularly sexual objects, is why we still live in a rape culture. And all three of those aspects of the collective socialization of manhood contribute greatly to sex trafficking. When you think about a person being sex trafficked, you see less value, you see property, you see objectification. One more time. Think about anyone being sex trafficked. Less value, property, and objectification is in play, and that's why we know it's important if we're going to address demand. We're talking about the collective socialization of manhood. If we're going to address men and demand, if we're going to prevent it, we have to look at the collective socialization, not just the men who are purchasing sex. We've got to look at all of us. And in our socialization, less value, property, and objectification. If we don't look at it through that lens, we will never get a room like this full of men. Right. We're not going to accomplish that goal. Now, we have to love men through the process. I hope I'm being kind and demonstrating that. We can have very accountable conversations and be loving and kind and respectful all at the same time. So this lack of interest, I'm not going to lean into it anymore at this time for the sake of time. But I can't, I can't speak to it enough, that what that looks like and how that plays out, and the importance of we as men collectively understanding that and making the changes we need to make. So I was doing some research on demand, and I was just really checking out language, and it was really messing with me, man. I was kind of going down rabbit holes, checking out the language. And insistence, and that word was a new word to me, preparatory. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, request made as if by right. Now, there are words in there that really connect around less value, property and objectification. And that's part of, again, the collective socialization of men. It's not just about men who purchase sex. We're all in there. We're all in there. And I still catch myself often. The difference I could do today maybe than yesterday is I'm no longer on, just remote control. I know when I'm doing it, and I can call myself out, right? But again, my mouth ain't no prayer book. I just got some information, right? Ain't no big I's, no little U's, right? I'm not an expert in nothing. I just got some information. We're all in this together. You won't hear me say you, you'll hear me say us and we, because we're in this together. So that word, preparatory, twisted me up a little bit. But, but when you look at this, like if you look for some operative words like F by right, right? The assumption that is my right, right? That relationship with male socialization is my right, right? That assumption. But again, that word, preparatory, twisted me up, so I went and looked it up, right? And this thing, I was like in another rabbit hole, insisting on immediate attention. I want it now, right? Immediate attention. Obedience, do whatever I say, how I say, when I say, where I say, do whatever I say. Right? No appeal, no challenge. You ain't got no voice in this. So when you go back here again, I'm looking at property also. Right? I'm looking at property also, which is in our socialization as men. We can't deny it or play with it. Any man in this room, if I seen you arguing with your wife in the mall and I walked up to her and said, "Miss, you okay?" You'll be offended. You'll be offended. Like, how dare you come and talk to my wife while I'm standing here? You'll be offended. I get it. I'll be offended too. Because it's in our socialization. I hope I breathe and take a deep breath and maybe say to myself, you know what? I could have been a stranger about to hurt my wife, and this guy just seen us having an argument, and he came over. I should be happy that he came over. But it's even hard for us to be happy because we'll say, well, he came over. What's his real agenda? Trying to get with my wife? That's where we go. Because just the notion of men being concerned about women in this situation is challenging for us. Finish this statement for me. What goes on in this house? Right? It's challenging for us. So we're asked to get in this space as a result to being a part of the solution to preventing demand, but we have to really think about some of the stuff we've been taught to. And it helps me to understand, and I get it, why 3/4 of the room is I'm making an assumption of women. But men, this can't happen without men at the table. It just can't and it won't. We live in a male-dominated society. Doesn't mean that there's not a lot of women, and doesn't mean that women have power and all of that, but the truth of the matter is, if you put all the men in the United States of America on this side of the room, and you put all the women in the United States of America on this side of the room, men run, control, and dominate this country collectively speaking. And we can't have the impact we want to have without men being at the table. A consumer's desire to buy goods and services without any hesitation and pay the price for it. That's demand. And it's a fair conversation to ask, what are we saying about women and girls? All right, what are we saying about women and girls? And where am I at in here? When we talk about less value, property, objectification, I may not purchase sex, but do I do less value? Do I do property? Do I do objectification? And if I do, am I contributing to demand? Am I part of the problem or am I part of the solution? It's a fair conversation, collectively speaking, for we as men to have. I want to just quickly say something about, well, let me just first say this. We call this the foundation as a pyramid, and this is all of us as men here. And the large majority of men are good men. The large majority of men don't perpetrate violence against women and girls. I make my assumption that the men in this room represent that group. But while we don't perpetrate violence against women and girls, we're silent to the violence that's happening, and that's the problem. Men who do perpetrate the violence are depending on us to stay the course and remain silent. Again, we're the first generation of men even being asked to have a voice. This is new to us in many respects. So the collective socialization of manhood, you have men here who perpetrate the violence, and then you have those of us who don't. But we're part of that socialization because our silence is affirming the negative behaviors, right? So this violence is built atop of that, and I'm gonna go right to the top to porn and just say a little something about that. I appreciate what John shared, and I only have one piece to add to what he shared. He said it, I'm gonna use the word, misogyny. Definition of misogyny is the hatred of women. He said it, the average age a boy first views pornography is around 10, 11 years old. And if we're not paying attention to him, how many views did you say? Because I hadn't heard that. 10,000.
10,000 before they leave high school.
Right.
On the average.
On the average of 10,000 before they leave high school. And what I think about with that, I'm gonna hold on to that, John. What I think about with that is he might have first viewed pornography in a very innocent way or sense, just to see two people having sex. Kids at school said something about it. He went to see two people having sex. And look, we're beyond the day of magazines, or your dad's old magazine that he thought you didn't know where it was at. We're way beyond that day. And parental controls, keep on doing it, I appreciate it, but it means nothing. It's really about our relationship with our children, right? And the need to talk to them. You don't have to wait to find out if your 12-year-old son has seen pornography. More than likely he has. Have conversations. We don't have to catch somebody in the act. Have conversations, because more than likely he has. And this is the thing, again, if initially it was just to see two people having sex, we can say that's innocent, all right? But the truth of the matter is there's a stimulation factor to pornography. And the more you watch it, by the time you get to, we say 10,000 views? Yes, you are watching violence. You are no longer watching two people having sex. What you're watching is dehumanizing, denigrating, right? Our boys are becoming misogynistic right before our eyes, and we don't even know it. And pornography is feeding that. Misogyny, misogynistic, the hatred of women. That's what we're talking about here, the hatred of women. That's what's happening. It's happening to good boys. Not talking about bad boys. I'm talking about our sons and our nephews, our little brothers. It's happening to good boys. They're not going to talk about it, and we're operating as if there's nothing to talk about. Please, make the assumption they're looking at pornography at 12. Make the assumption. You don't have to catch them, because if you don't get in the conversation now, 10,000 views later, it's a different conversation, right? It's a different conversation. Yeah, I know I'm still plucking at you with this. I really want it to really to think about it. You see, I showed this to you early on, but at this point in time of our conversation, I really want you to think about it. I'm hoping, really hoping, that my time with you will have an impact on the rest of your time over the next couple of days. You heard me mention we are the first generation of men having a responsibility to speak to teach healthy manhood. We haven't really developed the muscles for it yet, right? And men who are on the other side of this here, their muscles are fully formed and developed. They're all cut up, right? So we have our work in front of us, right? But developing a voice is just really, really important, right? It's really important. I'm gonna give a couple of men an opportunity to practice that muscle, right? So when we ask, or when we speak about the importance of boys being their whole self versus a role self, in 30 seconds, share what that means to you, talking to the men in the room. Share an example of that. Practice the muscle out loud in public. We have to practice it. If I ask this question to the women in the room, they'll all be all over it. I just know it because I've been there and I've done it. I'm asking the men, just quickly, what does that mean to you, a man being his authentic self? Now, what I also have learned, if I just go to a man and hand him the mic, he'll speak. I know it, because I've done it 100 times. But to volunteer for whatever, that jams us up, right? So for example, what does men being their authentic selves, what's one thing you like to say about that?
Practicing kindness towards your partners, practicing teaching your children, your grandchildren, what it means to be a man towards a woman as opposed to what the world thinks it means being a man.
See, all we have to really do is create space for we as men to come together and have these conversations. Because for many of us, it's on our hearts, right? And I got to tell you, to call the men, I've been at this for 20 plus years, and 9 out of 10 times, places I go to be with men where space has been created, the space has been created by women, right? Because they know and understand this need for men, right? How about yourself? So, what would you say, one thing you say is important when we talk about boys being their authentic selves?
So I'm a police chief, right? I volunteered to lead a human trafficking unit, ran human trafficking operations for 2 years, multi-agency unit, right? So I'm here because I want to be here, not because I have to be here, all right? Every man that I've known, I've been doing law enforcement work for 15 years. I worked with over 50,000 cops. Every man I know, and prior to that, my military experience, falls into one of two categories. They're either going to have a warrior mindset or they're going to have a guardian mindset. Warriors have a tendency to want to conquer and overthrow and achieve dominance by force. Guardians have the ability to do that, but they do it in a focused way, right? Not saying that a person with a warrior mindset is not going to be nice towards women, but a man with a guardian mindset who has that humility about him that he doesn't always have to be the boy in the front flexing, but he can become that boy if he needs to get in front of somebody that needs that boy in front of them flexing. I'm okay being in the back and being humble. I can be the guy in the back left. But if there's somebody, man, woman, family, that needs protecting, I can stand in front and be the imposing person to protect the people behind me. Men need to be taught to be guardians. I have a 7-year-old son. His name's Gideon Emmanuel. For Christians in the room, that name speaks for itself. My son understands that women are the most precious thing that God ever created, and that it is our role as men to protect them and keep them from harm. That's the difference between a warrior and a guardian.
Appreciate that. Well said. Being humble. Mention humility and being humble. All right, what are the characteristics of being humble to be what? And just shout them out in the room. Respectful, empathetic, kind. Right. Say it again. Quietly confident, teachable, right? These are the characteristics of being humble, right? There's room for growth for we as men in that space, right? Let me ask for one more man without me just going to someone. I got time for one more man. What would you say to, how would you speak to this, the importance of being your authentic self? Let me get one more man without me just handing him the mic. Just raise your hand and say, I want to say it. Yes, sir.
I don't know if it's answering your question, but it's been on my mind since we had to pitch up with 3 boys. I got 3 boys in my house.
Can y'all hear him?
I've got one of each. And I let them kind of do their own thing to find themselves. And I find myself as a man, sometimes the one that's the quieter one, I tell them, speak up, be a man. Say what you gotta say or whatever, poke your chest out. And then sometimes the one that's too loud, it's like, look, calm down. You don't gotta be the loudest one all the time. And then the middle one, which is my baby boy, he just follows around the bigger one, the manlier one, I should say, or not say, but he just follows him around, so he's the one just flexing just because everybody else is flexing. But it's on my mind is.
What's on your mind?
Just things that I can do different. Things that I can do better, or what I have been doing good. I mean, like I said, no kid is the same. Everybody's parenting experience is different. I actually my dad did all the work and everything, and then it was my mom. She was the kind of rougher disciplinarian, stop that crying, man up. I'm from the Bronx, been around a bunch of stuff. So you gotta show that when you're in certain areas, like you said. But at the same time, you gotta know there's a time and place for everything. And I worked in law enforcement. I'm out of it now, but I worked in the DA's office. But I got into it because of the guardian aspect. It's like, I'm not the one to walk around screaming, poking my chest out all the time. But if I see somebody that needs help, I'll step up and help them. And I try to teach that to my boys. And they're like, why do you go out there and do what you do or what I used to do anyway? Risk yourself. And people ask me that all the time. It's like, somebody got to do it. There's a lot of people that don't have nobody to step up on.
Well said. I appreciate that. Appreciate all the voices in the space. And I also appreciate you saying you're a good dad. You're doing some right things. Because we all are. We're doing some right things. And please, I hope nobody heard the message that I said we're not. I try to be as transparent as I can about myself. I don't have all the answers. I don't have this thing completely figured out. But what I do know is we, collectively speaking, we have work to do together as men. Oh, yeah, one last comment, and then we're going to pretty much come into a close. Yes.
I know you're speaking to men, and as you said earlier, who gives space to men, but this has been eye-opening as a woman speaking and hearing other thoughts. So thank you for sharing that. It's been, new sense, new thoughts. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your kindness. Yes. Yes.
This is just for the gentleman over here. When I heard you speaking, so hopefully this is encouragement to you. When I heard you speaking, what I heard was balance. And so it's like with the one kid who is the muscle man, hold back. And the one who is shrinking back a little, like step up. So it almost sounds like what one has, the other might need a little bit more of. And so just making sure that you pour what's lacking into the other one, and just giving them that balanced picture. So it sounds like, for what it's worth, like you are doing a good job, but that's what I hear, like the balance part.
Well said. Thank you for that, sister. Appreciate that. So just in closing, just some aspects of healthy manhood, right? Embracing expression of full range and emotion. Do not conform to the pressure to always be fearless and in control. Value a woman's life, treat all people equally, and promote the betterment of humanity. Don't use language that's denigrating to women and girls. Challenge the harmful messages that you received about gender. Develop an interest, a true interest in the experience of women and girls outside of sexual conquest. And that sexual conquest is not for the men in the room, but far too often that's for the boys. right? Boys see, with girls are ill, 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 ill. When you get about 14, 15, they start becoming, right? What's that about? And what's that relationship to sexual conquest, right? And we're not talking about all boys, but far too often what we're talking about is the truth, right? Because you got a boy who has 10 girls and they're all his friends, and he's not interested in any of them, and he's about 15, 16 years old, we start having questions for him. We start questioning his manhood, as if we're telling him, you can't have 10 girls and not be sexually interested in any of them. On a day-to-day basis, he will be questioned. Where are the boys? Why are you with them? What you do with them? They're just my friends, right? Think about that, right? We will not allow him to comfortably have those girls as his friends unless he's dating one of them. Asking for help is actually a sign of strength. Oh, clicked it past. But anyway, we're at the end time. So thank you all very much. I appreciate